Hello, it's Mary Jo.
Hey, Mary Jo, how's it going? It's Will Chandler.
It's who?
Will Chandler.
Oh, hi, Will. You
Well,
looking for Earl?
yeah.
Hold on, Will. Hello.
Hey, Earl, what's going on, man?
I'm doing good. I got my grandkids here. I do history with them on Tuesdays.
Oh, that's awesome.
We have this massive snowstorm, however. They came over anyway. I tried to cancel it, but so I got them writing notes off the whiteboard right now.
Well, yeah, man. I'll let you go then. I'm not trying to interrupt your time with your grandkids.
What's going on? I got a couple of minutes.
Well, I had just wanted to bring up, to talk to you about a couple topics because your perspective really threw me, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I thought it was cool. And a problem I've had with some things is knowing how to approach it with people, right?
Yeah.
Because I never, the way I think, the way I act, a lot of times some people take it the wrong way.
Yeah.
But it's never meant as an attack. And then also, like with my sister Stacy,
yeah.
There's some things I just won't talk about with her because I never wanted to seem like there's any type of attack or any type of, and as you know, with her, the situation sometimes just sucks because of the trauma she's been through, like all of us were, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a little more careful, just some things I might not talk to her or ask her about because I'm just worried it could be taken wrong,
Yeah.
But so so a couple of things I wanted to ask about a little bit more in depth.
Sure.
But like I'll just give you an example real quick if you got a minute. One of them is about the mediatorship of Jesus. I've found multiple references in the Jehovah's Witness literature going back to 79 and more recent in the last few years, saying that Jesus is only the mediator for the 144,000, but no one can show me a scripture to back that up. And so that leaves people like my sister in a weird position. And I studied with a local witness this past year, as you know, and he cut it off because he didn't like the questions I was asking. And I'm like, well, shouldn't we make sure of everything? Shouldn't we always, like in the Greek, it says, shouldn't we all, when we say in English, when we read the scripture, it says, always be ready to make a defense for the faith that you have.
Right.
That word in Greek is apologia, and that's where the term apologist, like a Christian apologist, comes from.
Right.
Because you're making a defense. It's not that you're defending yourself, and that's the problem with English versus Greek. It's not that it's really a defense, it's that you're giving a reason for why you believe what you believe.
Yeah.
So that was a legal term of the day where opposing arguments would be given or an accusation would be made in the case of a legal issue. And then the other side would have a chance to give their reasons for why they believe what they believe. And so something like, for me, when I read scripture, and like I think it's Timothy where it says there's one mediator between God and men, Jesus Christ, right? And then I go and I read on jw.org that, well, Jesus is only mediator for the 144,000. Well, then who's the mediator for everyone else? Because the Bible clearly states that Jesus is the mediator for everyone. But the Watchtower Society is constantly putting stuff out for decades now saying that Jesus is not the mediator for the great crowd. But no one can show me a scripture. You get what I mean?
Yep.
So
So you would like someone to try to show you a scripture as to why we think the way we do.
Right, exactly. Explain
Okay.
to me why that is part of your faith, because
Okay.
that's and of course I know that that's not probably something that you're going to be able to just rattle some stuff off to me, right?
I'd be very happy to do some research on it as to try to narrow it down. I mean, I know what I believe on it, but you are correct. It'd be hard to rattle that off the top of my head without giving it thought as to how I would explain what we think, and then come up with the scriptures that would support that.
Right, because then the great crowd also needs a mediator.
Right.
So who's the great crowd's mediator?
Right. So right, exactly. I do understand that question, and I do feel the great crowd does have a mediator in that sense, because Christ did die for all man's sins. So the role of mediator, I would be probably trying to explain, is different depending on, somebody could be a president of the company but also be the mayor of the city at the same time. But he's only president for the people that that work for him in the company. But if he's the mayor of the town also, then he would be the mayor for everybody. And that's a very rudimentary illustration, but it's just not. That's probably where our explanation is going to be. The context of who he's talking about in the scripture, we think is the anointed. But anyway, let me do some research on that.
Yeah.
And maybe I could shoot you an email about it, or you can talk to me again sometime about it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I'd be very happy to.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you. I mean, I've been doing a lot of research the last few years. In particular,
Yep.
I've focused on a lot of the Greek and the Hebrew.
Yep.
And I'm at the point now where I don't like. I say I don't like, and I've discussed this with some friends, of course, too. And I always start with don't like, and I never mean to, because it's not that I don't like English translations of the Bible.
Right.
But there's also part of me that kind of doesn't like the English translations of the Bible, any English translation.
Right.
Because so much is lost in the translation. But I understand why it's not that way, because it would take, the Bible would have to be many times as thick to properly convey in our current English what the Koine Greek says and what the Hebrew says.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I get that, but at the same time, the Bible has opened up so much for me in studying the original language versus just looking at it in English. And so when I come across stuff and I look at it and it, so that was the other thing that confused me is this guy, discontinues a study with me just because I'm asking questions and bringing stuff up. And I'm like, well, that also doesn't make sense. But then when I talked to you a few months back, I was really impressed with you, to be honest. And I thought you had a very balanced outlook compared to some of the ones I've talked to you. So anyway.
Well, I also have I was around during your childhood, and I've come to know after the fact a lot through Stacy, mostly, of how horrible stuff things happened. So another person that doesn't know all that might not be as open-minded toward where this guy's coming from.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's accurate or not. That's just that's what I might offer as partly an explanation. But I am kind of a guy that is a broad thinker.
Well, and I think I've always been pretty open and honest about where my heart lies. Even when you knew me, granted I wasn't grown up yet, but I've always pretty much just laid it out there. I've always been an open book.
That's how I recall you too. I don't think I've seen you since you were 16 or 17, though.
Yeah,
so
probably
that's
6.
That's an amazing thing to imagine that much time has gone by.
I know, it's crazy.
But I'm afraid it has. So.
Yep.
Well,
I didn't even know you had grandkids, dude.
Yeah, indeed. They're 10 and 9.
Oh, that's awesome.
But they homeschool, and so they school here for history, and actually they do music. I do music with them too.
Oh, that's really cool, man.
Yeah. So we perform about once a week at nursing homes. But I'm performing popular music. They join me and they have microphones and sing with me.
Yeah.
So it's very good. It's a great thing for them. So.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like it.
Anyway, it was good to talk to you, Will, and I will give some thought to the questions you raised. And I will mention something to you, too, that you jogged my memory on when you were talking about the Greek language.
Uh-huh.
And that is, a few years ago, I read an awesome book called Truth in Translation. And it was a professor of Greek, I think in Arizona. I don't know which school he's associated with, but he's a professor of Greek, and he wrote a book, basically a thesis that he did on the English translations of the New Testament.
Yep.
And he compared 10, because what he was investigating is the problem of interpretation getting in the way of translation. And he analyzed the King James Version, one of the Catholic Bibles, I think the New American Bible, and the New International Version, and the New World Translation of Jehovah's Witnesses, the one that we had back in 1984, which would have been the one you're more familiar with. Anyway, he did a pretty thorough analysis pointing out scripture passages, the way they were translated, that were influenced by the belief of the religion that was behind the translation, whether it was Protestant, Catholic, or Jehovah's Witness. Very interesting book, and it's some surprising conclusions that he came up with out of it, but it does speak to one of your comments of, well, why not to like the English translations, because you do lose a lot in the translation, and there's a high potential for bias.
I've noticed that in a lot of Bibles, including the Jehovah's Witness Bible, the New World Translation.
Well, he definitely commented to it. He included it in the analysis, and he particularly went with scriptures that were tricky to translate from Greek to English, and that there would be an opportunity for bias to creep in.
Well, I can give you a perfect example of that is Romans 10:9 through 13.
Mm-hmm.
And that, so in Romans in 10:9, I actually have my Bible. It says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart of a person believes, resulting in righteousness. You go forward to verse 13, and I'm reading from the NASB right now. It says, for whoever shall call on the name of the Lord will be saved. Now, in the New World Translation, at verse 13, they translate that as whoever calls the name of Jehovah will be saved. But the problem is context. You go back to Romans 10, verse 9, and it says that you confess with your mouth, Jesus is Lord. So we're talking about Jesus here, Jesus being Lord. And then you go forward to 13. Nothing has changed. We're still talking about Jesus here. But in 13, the New World Translation says whoever calls on the name of Jehovah. And that in the Greek is Kyrios. It's not Theos. It's Kyrios. Kyrios traditionally is translated as Lord. And 99.9% of the time, it's referring to Jesus. And in this passage, it refers to Jesus. So the New World Translation...
In that scripture, is it quoting the Old Testament?
What you'll find a lot of times, I don't know 100% just reading this one, but again, looking at the context, is Jesus. But then you have a lot of scriptures, like you go to Colossians, compare that with some of Psalms, and a lot of the verses that in the Old Testament they applied to God are now applied to Jesus. Like when it says in the Old Testament, Isaiah 43 is it or something like that? Or whatever, where it says, you will be my witnesses, says God, right? Says Jehovah. But then you have a number of places in the New Testament where Jesus says, you will be my witnesses. You will be my witnesses.
Right.
And so it's using Old Testament verses, but then applying them to Jesus, which is part of the reason a lot of people believe that Jesus is God, not the Father, but in essence God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not modalism. It's not something like that where God's like schizophrenic. It's
Right.
it's just stating that in essence that Jesus is God, like in nature. Like you and me are both human in nature. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do believe in the concept of the Trinity. Depending how you define it, some people define it differently, different than what originally it says.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's strong scriptural proof for that. But it doesn't mean they're the same person. But so in this scripture in Romans 10:9 through 13, I don't know right now off the top of my head if it's quoting anything, but at the same time, it shows an obvious bias in the New World Translation that in verse 13 they put Jehovah when the whole context of this is talking about Jesus. It's the name of Jesus we call on to be saved, not the name Jehovah, according to Romans 10:9 through 13.
Okay, so I'm writing down that scripture also, Romans 10:9 through 13.
That was a side. I didn't even call to talk about that. That was just a side point from.
Yeah. Well, I know that book that I just quoted to you or cited to you addresses the use of the name Jehovah in the New Testament in the New World Translation.
Right.
So this professor had a lot of comments about whether that should or shouldn't be done. So anyway, I just would mention that if you're interested in the...
Yeah, what was the name of the book again?
It's called Truth in Translation.
All right, cool. I'll check that out.
I'm sure it's available at Amazon.com, but I mean, I bought a copy of it a long time ago, and I must have loaned it to somebody because I don't have it anymore.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
I can't even remember the guy's name. But it was a very interesting read comparing 10 English translations.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep, so anyway, I got to let you go.
Yes, sir.
It was great to talk to you.
Yep. Yeah, okay if I call you again sometime?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, man. Take it easy.
Yep, we'll talk to you later.